Yes. Okay. Great. Well, welcome. Thank you to Adam and to the panelists on mining. We appreciate that discussion, a very important issue in environmental justice indeed. So just as a very brief introduction, I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to ask the panelists to each spend a few minutes introducing themselves, what they do, how they participate in the sort of generalized field of environmental justice and ocean resources. My name is Drew Lucas. I'm a professor here at Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of California, San Diego. I work as an oceanographer, and I work as someone who goes and makes measurements of the ocean in order to learn more about its function and the way that we affect it. And I'm very happy to be here. I've been involved with the Ghana COESSING Summer School for several years now, but I'm mainly just going to act as a moderator. So can we please have the panel introduce themselves? I'd ask Edem to start and just give a brief introduction, and we'll go through one by one.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and good evening, of course, because it's already evening here in Ghana. My name is Edem Mawu, and I am with the Department of Marine and Fisheries Sciences. I've been involved in the summer school since its inception in Ghana as a co-organizer. My field of interest is in the area of marine geochemistry, but I also look at marine pollution in relation to food safety and also ocean health. Yes, so for this afternoon, I will be talking about some of the issues that we think that have been of concern to the coastal ocean environment, and how we can resolve these issues in a more fairer and just manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edem. Appreciate it. Maybe Enrique Montes can introduce himself next, please.
Hi, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My internet connection has been terrible today. Anyhow, I've coincided with some of you in previous meetings. Edem, for example. Very happy to see you again. My name is Enrique Montes, and I am based at the University of South Florida. I'm a biological oceanographer, and I'm, my research is focused on using, for example, satellite data to track marine habitats and biodiversity, interested in phytoplankton dynamics from in situ measurements like genomics, and integrating those measurements with satellite data as well. And so this panel to me is really interesting and important because some of the things that I study have a very direct relevance to environmental justice, because coastal communities and small and large communities really depend on marine biodiversity of their coastal habitats for food, for materials, for culture, and many other things. And what we're seeing is that all over the world, these habitats are declining in their quality and health, and biodiversity is also declining, which has very important impacts on the way we live. So I'd be very happy to have a discussion on this.
Enrique, thank you very much for that. You came through loud and clear, so your connection seems good right now.
Thank you.
Richmond, why don't you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, and Afishapa to everyone. That's Happy New Year. My name is Richmond Kennedy Kwaku. Currently director, co-founder of Plastic Punch. We are an NGO raising awareness on dangers of plastic, working with coastal communities in Ghana, and also trying to get people to live towards a more sustainable lifestyle with less plastics. We believe with less plastics, better life. I'm a merchant navy officer by profession, sailing from port to port on ships, navigating, but currently with Plastic Punch full time. And yes, this panel is very important to us because of ocean resources generally, and with marine turtles. We work a lot with marine turtles, which are going extinct. And we believe that with the collective effort and indulgence and awareness, this situation could be reverted. So very happy to be here and looking forward to the panel.
Great, thank you very much, Richmond. And Michael, I see you've unmuted. I think you should be able to turn on your camera, but I apologize for the confusion in that. If you can turn on your camera, please do. If not, just go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you very much. I think I am having some issues with my camera, but hopefully you can see my pangolin background. I don't know, but
we can.
Great. So he will represent me. So my name is Michael Balinga. I am a biodiversity conservation specialist by training. And over the last 6 years, I have been working for a USAID program across the 15 West African nations, trying to support them in addressing wildlife crime issues. And so, of course, my work looked at the terrestrial aspects of wildlife crime, but also at the angle of coastal, aquatic, and marine species. So I have done some work with Richmond on sea turtles, but also looking at the broader spectrum of how aquatic wildlife, including birds, reptiles, and mammals, are in trouble along the Atlantic coast of West Africa and what needs to be done. So I will be talking today about how we have looked at this issue in West Africa and tried to find ways of developing a framework for us to have the right policies in place and drive all the action based on these policies. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to each of you for coming. And you know, if I can start with you, Michael, and maybe start with the Africans on the panel, I would like to know, you know, from your perspective, you know, what you think are the major environmental justice challenges that the continent or West Africa and specifically is facing, and what you view as the sort of best pathway forward to address these issues.
While I have the microphone, thank you, Drew. I think that in terms of environmental injustices that we face, I would like to go from the definition of the United States Environmental Protection Agency, which talks about environmental justice as being fair treatment, meaningful involvement of all people with respect to development and implementation of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And so I think the key issues we face in West Africa, and that's true for much of Africa, is that different ecosystems, different geographical areas do not have the same access to adequate protection. Our wildlife species do not have appropriate protection, and different stakeholders, including local communities, but also including state agencies, do not often have a say or adequate involvement in making sure that policies are defined or policies are enforced. So we find ourselves in a situation where we have things like forest degradation, agricultural expansion, mining, poaching, that are affecting our wildlife resources, especially those ones in the coastal areas. So sea turtles that come up to nest are captured, the eggs are poached, but also if a whale or a dolphin strays onto the beach, clearly its life is at stake and there isn't much that can be done at this point in time. So I think the injustices are based on the fact that we don't have appropriate policies in place. We don't have the resources we need to enforce these policies. And we are finding that our coastal resources are suffering from pollution, whether it's plastic, chemical, degradation of these habitats, and IUU in terms of overfishing, fishing that is not reported, that is not regulated, and absence of respect of whatever policies and regulations exist. So I think those are some of the key issues that we need to address in West Africa at the moment.
Thank you, Michael. And maybe I can ask Richmond to comment a little bit on resources for environmental protection and developing those within Ghana or within West Africa.
Thank you, Drew. And yes, so resources for, yes, so ocean resources in general is very important in our part of the world. To speak of Ghana, we have a 550-kilometer coastline where most of these communities live by fishing activities. That's how they sustain themselves. So it plays a very important role in the economy of most of these countries in West Africa on the coastline. Now, what we are realizing in areas where we work, for example, in the coastlines where we work in Ghana, is that the fishermen are catching more plastics than fishes. That's like a serious rate of plastic pollution. The UN mentioned that this would happen in 2050 if we do not change our lifestyles. But already in Ghana, in some areas, we are already experiencing this tragedy. That's to say that a lot of people are going to lose the socioeconomic potential that would have come out from the ocean as a resource. At the same time, we are endangering a lot of species that play great role in the ocean systems. For example, sea turtles, because that's what we work a lot with, and a lot of our work with Michael as well. They play a very essential role, though they are protected by law over here. What happens is they are still poached heavily at a massive scale. People use it for food, etc. So poverty could be an underlying factor, but at the same time, for some of these actions, at the same time, it is not an excuse considering the bigger role picture. For sea turtles, for example, if you permit me, someone will say, what is the role in the ocean system? What sea turtles do is, so leatherback sea turtles, for example, feed on the jellyfishes. Jellyfishes have the tendency to feed on small fishes. Thereby, if you have a lot of jellyfishes, then you have so much less fingerlings, which are going to become fishes for fisher folks, etc., to catch, to have that gain they could get from that. So what is happening now is turtles are confusing this for plastics, these jellyfishes for plastics, and feeding this amidst other threats that they pose, propeller actions, etc. So to say that, especially with SDGs 14, everything is linked and it's definitely for people and planet. So the ocean carries vast resources from not the perspective of mining, but from the perspective of what it gives to us in the natural way.
Thank you, Richmond. And that's very true. And the ocean resources is an important one all the way around the world. I was wondering if Edem might make some comments about how developing scientific expertise is important, both to protecting ocean resources and in general from the perspective of environmental justice.
Okay, thank you very much, Drew. Yes, so I would actually say that scientific expertise or capacity is very key if we want to, fight ocean injustice. Why am I saying that? Because if we want to improve the health of the ocean, we need to understand how it functions. We need to know the science behind the ocean. We need to know the basic, how do you call it, functioning, the basic functioning or the basic issues that actually drive or makes the ocean, thrive. And we can only get to know that by researching the ocean or by, doing research. And so when you come to Africa, that is one thing that is lacking, that we lack as a continent. We haven't been able to scientifically study the ocean because of this limited capacity that a lot of our institutions have. Now, when we talk about capacity, we can look at it in two ways. We can look at the human expertise that we need is lacking so much. We can also look at institutional capacity, so facilities, equipment, stuff that we need to, properly understand and characterize the ocean. We do not actually have that. And so how do we conserve a resource, or how do we conserve an environment if we don't have much knowledge about how it functions and all that? But I will also add to it that aside that, as a continent, we are also used to doing things using top-down approach. So aside capacity building, there are other issues that we need to carefully look at as a continent. Most at times, if we want to, come out with laws, policies that actually protect the ocean, we do not involve the stakeholders. Okay. If you want to protect turtles, it is practical to work with the communities. It is practical to actually, get the community together, get their view, engage them when you want to develop guidelines to actually protect turtles. But this is something that we actually lack as a continent. Most of the times, we have people at the top there coming out with policies. Then when they're done, they want to implement it at the grassroots level, and it doesn't work, it fails, because these people are not properly engaged. We have seen a lot of developments along the coast of Ghana, for example, since the last 50 years. What has been the outcome of these developments? It has been so negative on the coastal environment, so we have lost quite a number of our lagoons. A typical example is, for example, the Tema port, for example. As a result of the construction of this port, we have lost two of our key lagoons, the Sakumatu Lagoon and also the Chemu Lagoon. They are gone now. Meanwhile, these lagoons play a crucial role, to the adjacent coast, okay? And so we cannot talk about environmental justice without looking at the way we do things as people. We have to start looking at things, doing things, looking at taking the top-down, bottom-up approach. We have to involve everybody when we want to conserve the environment. If we want to do anything that really has something or that has the potential to impact the coastal environment negatively, we don't just look at it from the top, sit at the top and then look at things and then think that if we develop or design policies, laws, and all that, is going to work without involving the key stakeholders. Okay, so I would actually say that yes, we need to build capacity, but also we need to start inclusive planning, or inclusive conservation exercises, or planning, or if it's laws that we are coming out with, it has to be really inclusive. That is the only way forward.
I agree with that. I think the tension between top-down governance versus grassroots. Another way to look at it is developed countries, trying to participate in the governance or the resource management of other countries. All of that has lots of difficulties, and has not shown to be, is not always shown itself to be equitable. I think we need to get back to that, because I think that's sort of the core discussion here, or one of the core discussions. I do want to hear from Enrique, because the tools to monitor the environment have really changed, particularly in the last 15 or 20 years, with the advent of just these incredible wide field of view satellite products and other types of publicly available data. And so I was hoping Enrique could give us a little bit of his thoughts on how we can monitor the planet, how we can really know about these type of issues as they arise.
Yeah, I think Adam just put the nail in the coffin in the issue here, which is basically how we build capacity at the global scale, not only in Africa, but all over the world, in a way that it's, standardized, and it's things that are measured here are comparable to what's happening somewhere else. Specifically for Africa, how measurements of biodiversity happening on the eastern side of Africa compared to those on the western side. These are crucial challenges, very important challenges that Adam has raised here, which are basically the way that we're going to be able to tackle the challenges that and issues that Richmond and Michael were raising before. Is all of these coastal systems are experiencing drastic changes in their biodiversity and in ecosystem health. But the problem is that we are not able to communicate these issues properly to decision making, because we don't have a way to show data in a way that it's easily understandable and that can actually portray the changing over time. So the only way we can do that is by building capacity, as Adam was saying. But building capacity is not trivial. It has many different, it has many ramifications. It has different ways of, because this is a multi-dimensional problem. One of them is that you need to put in place a framework that allows countries and local communities to collect data from life in the sea using standard protocols, ensure that the quality of the data is appropriate for this type of analysis, and that you can repeat measurements over time. You can look at fish communities on a seasonal basis, for example, or at least annually at the same places using the same protocols over time. And once you collect those observations, you need to share them. You have to make them publicly available through open access repositories like the Ocean Biodiversity Information System. But all of that requires training in data collection protocols and techniques, training in technologies that can be applicable to all of these countries where where infrastructure is put in place and resources are often not available to deploy complex technologies, or what those technologies that are affordable to most of our countries can be utilized, and how you train people in the application of these tools, and how, most importantly, how you ensure that the data that is being collected on sea turtles, on abundances of jellyfish, for example, can be made publicly available, and how you utilize those records to display, a very simple report that will, allow policymakers really understand what's happening at a particular site and make a decision on how to protect those environments and those. So this is an information system challenge. This is very often out of the realm of the things that we typically do. We're biologists. We're focused on the taxonomy of the things that we collect. We may be very well experienced in a technique for collecting data, but very often we don't know how to make those data publicly available, and that's crucial. And this is something that we're trying to tackle through the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, which is a more or less global program that is trying to organize and integrate the global community to start collecting data using what we call best practices and standardized tools and protocols, so that people can really get going monitoring efforts at their study sites, and make sure that they will have at least the resources to do so, intellectual resources, technological resources, and have the capacity to share the data to have an impact, really. And so for an example, and something that we're trying to do, and this is a part of the reason I'm participating in this panel and in this school, is to try to engage with African communities that are interested in collecting biodiversity data to join the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network, and I'll send the link in the chat window to give you more information about this effort. But this is trying how we bring the African communities and the communities in the Americas to work together to really start to understand how life in the sea is changing and why.
Thank you, Enrique. I just want to encourage the attendees to make sure if you have questions, please do put them in the Q&A and we can have the panel respond. I wanted to build on what Enrique just said and ask Richmond this question. We talk about social media or the new information pathways by which we can spread, information about environmental justice or anything. Can you comment a little bit about how one undertakes a grassroots approach to these problems in today's day and age of social media, and how that maybe has changed or has enabled you to reach people?
Well, thank you, Drew. So at Plastic Punch, we have had a very community-based approach towards all our actions. And one of the most popular amongst them are beach cleanups. We usually carry out citizen science approaches towards the beach cleanup, in that we are very much aware, for example, cleaning the beach is not a solution, but at least it brings the community in contact with the problem. And then it gives them the opportunity to change their habits when they are exposed to it. Because the truth is, people do not realize the amount of trash that we collectively make, because they usually visit touristic beaches and things like this. So we are not able to really see the real effects. So back to the question, we use media tools a lot and it seems to be working. For example, for beach cleanups, we just call for volunteers, and we have about 300, 400 people subscribing to it. They will subscribe to it because we have done the necessary engagements, letting them kind of understand the problem and show them the problem that they might not be thinking about. For communities, basically to work in communities is for you to gain their trust. You need to earn the trust of the community, and for this you need to participate in their other actions that the community is carrying out already, other interventions, even if it's not in line with your topic, but in your mission. Show some interest, talk to the stakeholders in the community, the chiefs, because these are the people where you really want to make change. And for us, all the communities we work are more than happy to support, to the point that we have not started a collection scheme yet for the plastic. But then communities are like, okay, we have a land, come and set up a collection facility, a buyback facility, so that we can make use or recycle more of the plastics we are generating, rather than finding them on the ocean. So that is to say that, the community themselves, if they get into the concept, the rest of the support is putting the dots together of networking, etc., because then they give you all the blessing, and social media propagates that, and other communities also want to replicate that same model. So that is how it works. Once it's successful in one community and the message is taken out, with the data communicated, a lot of other communities will join in, I believe.
Thank you. There's a question, a Q&A from Mabel who asks, and I'm asking you, Richmond, because it's directly about plastic pollution. What can be done about a specific example? What can be done about the proliferation of restaurants on the coastline and the beaches, since they are a source of plastic pollution? Can you talk to that for a moment?
Yeah. So for restaurants, etc., it would be great if they could adapt to principles of reduce, reuse, recycle. Reduction is simple. They could move to reusable straws, for example, cut all the plastic straws, refuse the straws. They could also stop giving disposable packaging, this takeaway packs, and rather encourage people to bring their own bowls or find another sustainable options. There are other options now. It's a little bit expensive, more expensive, the more environmentally friendly options. But I believe that when the community is educated, they will be ready or always available to buy into that. Recycling also, on the beaches, we find a lot of plastic cups, which this coastal restaurants use when we have beach cleanups. It's one of the things we find a lot. If all these people could use glasses, for example, wash it and reuse, it will reduce all those number of things we find there. So it's more about changing the mindset into a more sustainable one. And at the same time, as much as possible, these facilities should try to recycle. We at Plastic Punch work with some of them already. They are happy to work with us, especially when it comes to recycling and offering reusable bags to their customers, for example, is another option. One major thing, the power is in you, the consumer. So when you go to these places, it will be great for you to propose to these restaurants, hey, can you stop using this, that, a little bit of education here and there, reusable bags, single-use straws, single-use packaging. And I believe the change starts with all of us. When you ask it, you get it. And the change continues. I hope I answered the question, Mabel.
You did, and thank you very much for that. And I was going to return to a comment that Edem made regarding the Port of Tema, and there's a proposed project, or maybe underway project now in Takoradi, also to expand the port. And Edem, if you could talk a little bit about the question that Emily Schroyer has asked on the Q&A about how realistically we do have to think about the economics and the potential benefit of these large projects. And if you could maybe comment on the difference between the implementation of large projects in rural versus more developed or more urban areas, and about how you do the trade-off, or you understand the trade-offs between, for example, a large port project and the value of the lagoons that they're replacing.
Right. So commenting on or answering Emily's question, I would say that it is when you take the rural areas and the metropolitan coastal communities, it is more to do with the connection with the resource. Okay, so that in my opinion, I think that it is more easy to actually regulate and manage coastal resources in rural areas than in metropolitan areas. Why? Because in the rural areas, people have direct connection to the resources, okay? So in these rural areas, you have people whose livelihood depends solely on the fish. And so they will do everything to do what? Conserve the resource, if they are properly engaged or involved in the planning process, as opposed to coming to the metropolitan areas, which are more cosmopolitan also, because you have different people with different interests. Many a times people are indirectly connected to the resource in the cosmopolitan areas or in the metropolitan areas. And so it is difficult to actually, get people to really understand some of the issues. But when they are directly connected to the resources, it is easier. So for example, with this plastic issues, when you work at the rural level or the community, the very lowest level, you realize that people are even more willing to comply than when you come into the big cities, where you think that people are even more educated and so they should know better. Okay, it is because of this, connectivity that you have with the resource, right? Now, when it comes to the Tema port example that we are talking about, for the existing ports, we have actually seen how costly it has been to the environment. We have seen that livelihoods have been lost. Okay, but when you also look at when you speak to the community, what they have lost in terms of losing the ecosystem can also be quantified in monetary terms, because there are people whose livelihood actually depends on these lagoons, right? Now, we have people who have encroached the lagoon, they have built houses because there's a lot of work at white-collar jobs at the port, and so people are, migrating into these areas, and so the lagoon has been encroached upon. But there are people whose livelihood depend on this lagoon, and their livelihood can be quantified in monetary terms. And so if we lose the lagoons, we are not just losing an ecosystem as we see it, but we are losing, one, the services that this ecosystem is giving to the environment. And then two, we are also losing what? The value, or in terms of livelihood support. We're also losing that, okay? And so this cannot be quantified. It looks like, something that is really small, but if you have to quantify the role that these lagoons play in regulating the climate, if you have to quantify the role that they play in, checking coastal erosion, the role they play in, filtering pollutants from coming into the ocean, then in monetary terms, it's a lot.
Yes, I think that environmental economists work on trying to quantify those values and compare them against against the sort of typical approach of calculating trade through ports, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there. I wanted to ask Michael, about policy, public policy, and how it can, how policy initiatives can begin to change people's attitudes. Michael, you mentioned that part of in the chat, part of the answer to the restaurant, so to local point source pollution, small point source pollution, is in incentives. How do you make it so that these small businesses see the value in not continuing the methods that they're currently using, which lead to pollution? Can you comment a little bit about how incentives and environmental sort of tourism and those sort of things can play a role in this problem?
Thank you, Drew. I think it's critical first of all, for our governments to understand that they have a very important role to play in driving positive behavior change in favor of environmental sustainability. It is very easy for us to sit in offices and develop policies that sound nice on paper. But whether these policies are realistic is a totally different matter. And so it's important to go to the people who are actually the actors on the ground. These restaurant owners, hotel owners, tour agencies within the tourism sector, and maybe people who produce kente in Ghana, in the Volta region. Well, all these people who contribute to the entire tourism sector, they drive the traffic of people coming to the beaches, of people who will request for water that perhaps is served in plastic packaging. All these various services that people need are dependent on these tourism sector institutions, these small businesses, maybe medium businesses as well. So if these businesses understand that they will lose the biodiversity, for example, on their beaches, which their activity depends on, if they understand that they will lose the habitats, the scenery of these ecosystems that their industry is based on, then they would be more interested in contributing to the solutions. But they have designed their business models based on what they know and what they have available. So that's where the government policies need to make sure that if we are recommending they move to more sustainable options, straws that can be reused, maybe paper straws or metal straws, where do they get them? Are there industries in country that can produce them? Are there businessmen who can import them? So government needs to make sure that if you can justify your production or your importation based on how it will contribute to this environmental sustainability, then you get rebates on your tax payments, or you get subsidies for introducing new options that are environmentally sustainable alternatives. Perhaps there are options for creating platforms where people can trade their plastic refuse from these beaches. And so for a certain quantity of plastic refuse that a restaurant has collected and put back into the recycling system, then they get a certain amount of subsidy or a certain amount of tax reduction or whatever else. So I think the key thing here is not that we have all the answers to how these incentives can be set up. It's more about understanding why they need to be set up and how they can change the way that the system functions. And if you talk to these restaurant owners, the hotel owners, etc., I am sure that they can suggest, they can recommend the types of incentives that would work for them. And we can go from there to jointly develop the policies that are practically applicable.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that there can be a positive feedback. You know, a cleaner beach is likely to be a beach that more people want to spend time at. People want to spend time at a beach. They're going to bring money with them and spend it at restaurants. And this is kind of the approach of environmental tourism in general that has been around for 30 or 40 years now in our half of the world over here, where people have brought money from other countries to countries like Costa Rica and spent it in the pursuit of looking for beautiful places. And there's been, there's good evidence that feedback between incentivizing, allowing the local businesses to see benefit, can lead to an increased environmental quality. I wanted to move a little bit away from the local and talk a little bit more broadly now. The ocean is a very interesting thing to consider from an environmental perspective because, in a way, it's always moving. It's connected between all of our countries. There's no borders really. I mean, we put borders in the ocean, but the currents don't really pay attention to the exclusive economic zones of certain countries. And so, I'd like to get the opinion. I'll start with Enrique, and maybe we'll hear from the other panelists. I'd like to get the opinion of folks about the responsibility, the global responsibility to take care of our oceans, where we see the possibility for international cooperation and how we go about influencing change when it's, I think, quite obvious that, for example, from a fishing perspective, that some countries are going and exploiting fisheries in other countries' waters, either with or without permission, and that has a real impact on small communities in the countries where they're being these fisheries are being exploited, as one example. So Enrique, if you could talk a little bit about sort of the global responsibility to the local problems and how that's different, a challenge or a hard challenge that ocean conservation and ocean environmental justice faces.
Well, this is a massive undertaking, and possibly unlike land ecosystems where, policy may drive conservation efforts more effectively on, let's say, a forest ecosystem than on ocean, simply because of the fluid nature of the ocean, as you said, Andrew. So, plastic pollution that is happening in Nigeria will very likely, or in Ghana, will likely affect habitats in the neighboring country, right? So whatever we implement in a country will very likely affect the quality of the ecosystems in neighboring countries, or even further than that. An example of that is plastic pollution that is coming from Asian countries, that is pouring a ton of countries like Indonesia, the Philippines, where the source of plastic pollution has been documented as being extremely high. That is affecting countries in the Americas and in other parts of the world. So this is indeed a problem of interconnectivity between our countries through the global ocean. That is on the pollution side, but also on the biodiversity side. So this is why we're pushing very strongly for the highlighting the importance of implementing monitoring efforts that are intercomparable. So if each location or each country decides to start a monitoring program of let's say biodiversity, coastal biodiversity, it's ideally you want that program to be compatible and interoperable with efforts that are happening in other parts of the world, so that we can build together policies that at the global scale, let's say under the UN framework, the Ocean Decade program, for example, that can help really implement similar efforts somewhere in other parts of the world. This is the only way that we can ensure that we can actually make meaningful and impactful policies and decision-making processes that will benefit not only us, but everyone else. And in that process, we benefit ourselves. So the main issue here is that we need to make sure that the communities own their data, that data, in a term that I'm not really sure it's the right term, but I like to see it as a process by which we democratize data access and understanding. Data must not be a realm of scientists and policymakers. It needs to be a realm of everybody. Just as everybody has a Facebook account or a social media account, and they understand how people interact with you through the internet, they have an identity on the internet. We need to have the same level of ownership for data that is being collected in the ocean. Physical data, biological data, chemical data, satellite data, which is already publicly accessible to everybody. We can now write very simple code that will tell you how warm or cold the water is in your areas. All you need to do is type in the coordinates of a location and you'll get that information. You can get it on your phone. So how do we build an infrastructure that will give you the exact type of information for biodiversity and for pollution is critical. And this is something that we need to accomplish over the next 10 years, very quickly.
Thank you, Enrique. I agree completely. So Edem, there's a question from the audience from Paul, which is specific to the role of public institutions like the University of Ghana, for example, in this issue of combating overfishing or environmental degradation along the coastline or inland. Can you speak to the role of public institutions in Ghana or elsewhere in this problem?
Okay, so yes, as public institutions, we have to work together. We all have different roles. We have government institutions that are into monitoring, regulating, making sure that laws are being enforced, but they cannot do that without the role of we, the scientists. So it is not really a job for one person or one institution. We have to, it must be a collaborative effort. Yes, indeed, we have scientific evidence that the stocks are declining, but the research that we do as public institutions should not only bring out the problems, but it should also bring out solutions as well. So if our stocks are declining, what can we do to rebuild the stock? If people are depending so much on the fisheries, what other kind of livelihood support can we give, or can our research give to these communities? We should be able to provide enough information. So, for example, when it comes to foreign vessels coming to fish in our waters, sometimes it's even so difficult to track these vessels. Okay, but if the institutions, so for example, in University of Ghana, what we are coming out with is we are looking at vessel monitoring systems where we can do this remotely. And with this, we are working with the Navy to provide information on illegal fishing activities that are occurring in our waters. And so it has to be a collective effort. One person or one institution cannot do it. We have to all work hand in hand to address some of these issues.
Yes, I agree, and I think that the power of social media has allowed a lot more people to become engaged, and so that's very good. But I do believe that there remains to be there remains an important role for public institutions, academic institutions, in this problem, both in terms of documenting problems, finding solutions, and often doing research that doesn't necessarily seem to have any major, that's treating some major problem, but builds knowledge. And that ultimately we use that knowledge, the creation of knowledge to improve our environment. We have a couple more questions. So I want to get to these couple more questions for a couple more minutes. And then we're going to just ask each panelist, because we're coming to the end of our time, to just sort of, if they have a couple last thoughts. And so let's see here. So I'd like to just ask quickly, this is from Na, who asks, how do we ensure that our, this is probably the hardest question to answer. So I'll just let someone volunteer to answer this one. How do we ensure that our leaders and the policymakers are aware of the issues that we're talking about, and how do we influence the government to make change in these areas, as private citizens, as scientists, as concerned parties? So whoever would like to tackle that question, I'm more than interested to hear from one of the panel members on that.
Maybe I can start, somebody can also take it up from where I leave.
Well, Adam, why don't you go, and then I think Michael would like to say something as well. So please, Adam.
Okay. Yes. So that's really an interesting question, because everything that we have been discussing here boils down to who is going to implement, who is going to come out with policies that can address the issues that we are talking about here. So it starts right from here. I think that in meetings like this, we have to involve, or we have to get people from the government sector to be part of the discussion, or to even join the audience to listen, to understand what the issues are. Many a times we go for scientific conferences where we have only scientists trying to present results to scientists only. Okay. Now, if we are interested in our fellow scientists, knowing what we are doing, meanwhile, these scientists do not have the power to actually implement what our research is saying, then I think that we are getting it all wrong. So moving forward, we have to ensure that anytime we want to discuss something, be it scientific evidence that has to do with the environment, we need to make sure that there are people from the policy, area, or the leaders, our leaders. We get people from these areas to also sit in the discussion and understand the issues. The other thing is also about communication, because a lot of times we do research that we can understand among ourselves as scientists, but we are not able to communicate this outcomes to the people who are meant to actually take up the research and implement the outcome of the research. So these are a few things that I'll talk about. Maybe Michael can add more to it.
Yes, please, Michael.
Thank you, Adam. I think you are spot on. And what I would like to add is that this is about advocacy. And so there's the question of how do we make sure that we are getting the right entry points? Because you talk to the wrong person in government and then your message just gets squashed. It dies there. So can we identify champions or allies within government at different levels who would be happy to facilitate the transmission of these points and these recommendations? And in the work we have been doing in West Africa, we found that talking directly to the national government sometimes doesn't work. So there are moments when if you can get access to the UN conventions who are dealing with some of these issues, or if you can get access to someone at the ECOWAS Environmental Directorate who would give you a listening ear, then you can influence government from outside. there's a tendency, and I'm sorry to say it this way, but there's a tendency in most of our African countries that if it's a foreigner talking about issues to our governments, that foreigner gets listened to more than if it is national experts talking to them. So I think the role of networks is critical. Getting people, institutions from outside to talk to our governments is one way of getting a listening ear. But we need to make sure that we have the science ready, we have the data well packaged, because giving a 40-page document to a director in Ghana, he will not read it. But if you do a policy brief, which is maybe 2 pages, 3 pages, he's more likely to look at it. And if you want to push the public, general public, to change behavior, to advocate for these changes, it's not the policy brief, it's an infographic, or it's something else. So the packaging, getting our communication right. So the right entry points, the right networks, and the right data, and then the right communication. That's what I would say at this point.
Thank you, Michael. That's very well said. And I'll ask for final words from Enrique and then Richmond. Enrique, I don't know if you have thoughts on that issue or anything else that's come up today for some final thoughts.
I totally agree with what Adam and Michael just said. The entry points are crucial, but I would say I would complement that we all need to work very hard on educating our communities. And educating the communities is by using the tools that, for example, Michael just highlighted. You know, how you build a very easy interactive infographic that will tell people, you know, how some of the resources that are valuable to them are changing over time in a lagoon in Ghana. So, you know, you go on a web page, you click on an icon that looks like a fish, and it'll tell, well, this is how your fish go ups and down on a seasonal basis, or whether they're disappearing or whether they're coming back. The same with invasive species. Anyhow, these tools are already available, and we all need to make sure that they become available all over the world so that we can educate people, because once you educate people on how the system works, then they have the power in some instances to put pressure on their politicians that really care about these issues. When people have the power of choosing who's going to represent them in a Congress or a parliament, then this is a really important incentive for them to really push the environmental agenda forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Enrique. And Richmond, for some final words. I know you're engaged in exactly that. Yeah, go ahead.
I believe Adam, Enrique, and Michael have basically mentioned all the components in the piece. But as a civil society organization, I mean, we believe in approaching government to listen to us in all the methods mentioned, but what we find more effective is the power of the people. If we can get, say, 3,000 people to sign a petition towards a topic, you send it to the EPA or the most relevant agency, and this will also require that these people signing the petition have enough information and understand the topic and really understand what they are demanding for. So it all boils down to awareness and education first part, having very relevant data sets to add to what you're advocating for, what you are asking for. So all plays part of it. And when you have all these pieces together with the right communication, depending on who you want to target or who will best move the pawns at that time, then you design a strategy. So yes, it's actually collective action to achieve that.
Great. Well, I agree with that as well. So I just want to thank each and every panelist today. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you to the attendees for tuning in on both sessions. You know, I think it's really good to have these conversations, and we obviously need to keep having these conversations. And one of the few, you know, bright spots about this pandemic that we're going through is that these type of conversations are a little bit easier because we're a little bit more used to having these interactions in this virtual format. And I know it's a very small thing, but at least we can maybe try to keep doing this and hopefully build community across the world. So with that, I will say thank you again to everybody. and I really enjoyed it. And we'll see you soon, hopefully, in person. With much love.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.